Alright guys, this retrospective has officially arrived at the dark ages of Capcom, meaning these next few videos in the series are going to be especially interesting. For those of you who might not have heard it before, the dark ages of Capcom is a term that Capcom fans have started using to describe a period in Capcom's history where the quality of their games significantly declined across almost every single one of their iconic franchises, and Resident Evil was certainly no exception to this. The exact years of this period aren't necessarily defined, and you'll hear slightly different things from fans of different Capcom franchises, but I've always viewed this period as mostly being between 2012 and 2017. So it's only fitting that the first Resi game we're going to cover from this period is the infamous Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This was a title that was conceptualized during the development of Capcom's similarly controversial Lost Planet 2, in which some of the higher-ups thought that the 4-player co-op shooting action of the game would be a perfect fit for the Resident Evil franchise. But the bulk of Capcom's development staff at the time was tied up with the development of the upcoming Resident Evil 6, so instead of splitting their resources, they outsourced this new title to a developer known as Slant Six Games, a newer studio who had worked on literally nothing other than one RTS and 2 third-person shooters for the SOCOM franchise, with none of these 3 games having reviewed particularly well or been very popular among players. So, they wouldn't have exactly been my first choice, but surely Capcom knows what they're doing and wouldn't just give away one of their most beloved IPs to a team of developers who wouldn't do it justice, right? Ugh. The game would eventually release in March of 2012, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this one or save it as some sort of big reveal because I'm assuming that most of you guys are already more than aware of how this one was received. This title was pretty much universally hated by Resident Evil fans, and while some certainly did enjoy the title, or at least find aspects of it that they liked more than others, the general sentiment in the community is that this is one of the worst Resident Evil titles ever made. So naturally, in order to really cover every title in the series properly, I recently grabbed 2 digital copies of the game, one for me and one for my girlfriend, and made her run through the entire thing with me from front to back. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, could maybe be considered a form of emotional abuse. And as always with these black sheeps that we cover on the channel, I've actually come out of this one with a lot of mixed thoughts, so for those of you who are willing to humor me, let's really dig into what went wrong, as well as what went right with Operation Raccoon City. But before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 20th in a series of videos where I'm playing and reviewing every game in the Resident Evil franchise in release order. You don't have to have seen the other videos in the series in order to enjoy this one, but I would definitely recommend checking those out if you're a big Resident Evil fan, or just someone who likes their stories complete. So for those of you that are interested in checking it out, I'll have the full series playlist linked in the description below. But with that out of the way, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City is a squad-based third-person shooter developed by Slant Six Games and published by Capcom for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC in 2012. It's worth noting that we played the Xbox 360 version of the game for this video, which definitely isn't the best one, but the PC version was delisted from stores years ago due to the shutdown of gaming for Windows Live. And this is because that shutdown actually resulted in it being impossible to even reach the main menu of the game without some workarounds on PC. I was originally just going to go and buy us some old Steam keys that were floating around for the game so that we could record the best version, but yeah, I think we'll just go with the Xbox version. The basic story premise here is that we play as members of the Umbrella Security Service, more specifically as a team of the USS's most elite agents, Delta Team. The game opens with Delta Team meeting up with the now iconic character Hunk, who just so happens to be Alpha Team's leader from RE2. We're meeting him at the entrance of Umbrella's underground lab in Raccoon City because we're here to assist Alpha Team in their mission to stop William Birkin from selling the T-virus to the US military and retrieve the samples of the G-virus while we're at it. Which, as a concept, is great. Not only do we get to play through an iconic event from the Resident Evil universe that we never got to see this closely before, but we also get to play as members of Umbrella's Special Forces, allowing us to get the perspective of the antagonists for the first time in the series. This operation obviously ends up playing out just like we see in RE2, with Birkin infecting himself with the G-Virus out of desperation, accidentally leaking the T-Virus samples he had on him into the sewers of the city, and of course, leading to the Raccoon City outbreak. Once the outbreak has started, our objective changes to wiping out any evidence in the city that Umbrella was ever involved, and we spend the rest of the campaign moving through the infected streets of Raccoon City to carry out a variety of covert operations before the US military is able to secure any of the evidence. As we move through the city, there are all sorts of little bits of fan service and references to those old titles set in Raccoon City, from a visit to the RPD, a shootout with Nikolai from RE3, an encounter with the Nemesis, run-ins with Leon Kennedy, you name it. And again, this is an awesome concept. I wholeheartedly believe that this is one of, if not the single best concept for any of the Resident Evil spin-offs that we've covered up to this point. But of course, the concept alone can't carry the game. So how was the execution? Well, to start, I have to say that visually, this is a pretty ugly game. Obviously, it's not running in a full 4K or anything here, since we had to play on the Xbox 360, but even beyond that, it just looks very odd. I think that this mostly comes from an inconsistent art style, with the characters and environments in this game feeling like they were designed in complete isolation from one another rather than with one consistent style in mind. The game just generally doesn't look great either, with a lot of the environments being pretty poorly lit and just being very uninteresting from a visual standpoint. And that's when you can even see the environments, because plenty of this game takes place in areas that are so dark that it becomes genuinely hard to navigate at times. And to make things even worse, this game runs like absolute shit on the console versions. Throughout our playthrough, the game was constantly stuttering and dipping below its 30 FPS target on both of our systems, which is kind of crazy because if you look at some of the other Xbox 360 titles coming out at about the same time that had stable frame rates and significantly better visuals, yeah, it just kind of puts ORC to shame. The game was actually chugging so hard through some levels that both of us ended up getting headaches from how inconsistent and choppy it was, and would have to take a break from playing the game before going back to it. At the very least though, it's a good thing that we opted for the 360 version, because I can only imagine how much worse it would have been if we went with the PS3. Obviously, these performance issues won't be present on the PC version if you have it, but considering you can't buy a PC copy for less than roughly $1,000, I'm going to assume that anyone who gets themselves a copy from this point on will also be stuck with the console versions. But getting into the gameplay itself, Operation Raccoon City's single-player campaign is made up of 7 missions that can all be played fully in co-op with up to 4 players. Every player in the lobby gets to choose which character they would like to play as beforehand, with each of the game's 6 available characters essentially being their own class. You've got your assault class, your recon class, the medic, the tank, you've seen it all before. Each of these classes will then have 2 passive abilities that they're always benefiting from, and you'll be able to choose one of the 3 available active abilities to bring with you into your mission. These passives and abilities all of course fit within their class archetype as well, with things like the assault class being able to activate a short period of enhanced damage that also grants them invincibility so they can run in, the recon class being able to use active camouflage, or the medic being able to shoot themselves or their teammates with various types of syringes that will either heal the player or grant them some specific buff. So your choice of character in ORC will actually have a pretty major impact on how you'll want to approach the game, and subsequently, your experience with it. Both myself and my girlfriend had a ton of fun messing around with all the different characters and trying out their different abilities to see how they changed the overall experience, and of course, find which one was ultimately our favorite. The only real issue with the characters here is that the progression of the game is built around playing the competitive versus modes on offer, or just replaying the campaign over and over again. Every time you complete a mission or a multiplayer match, you'll earn some experience, and that experience can then be used to either unlock or upgrade your character's abilities, or to unlock new weapons to deploy to your next mission with. It's actually a pretty solid progression system, all things considered, but we unfortunately weren't able to even get close to upgrading or unlocking everything by the end of our playthrough and really getting to see the game working at its full potential. So even though we didn't get to see the absolute best of it, it's pretty clear that ORC actually has a surprisingly solid co-op foundation that it's built upon. But how is the core gameplay loop? Well, it's not great. Let's just start with the very beginning of the opening mission of the game. We meet up with Hunk, walk through some hallways of that underground lab, and then suddenly get ambushed by UBCS forces, leading us into our first combat encounter of the game, a shootout with other humans. Great start to a zombie game, huh? For encounters like this one, the game uses an incredibly generic cover-based shooting model that's implemented fairly well actually. Weirdly, way better than RE5's implementation of the same mechanics, but it does still feel a bit sloppy. Instead of having a button to press to stick yourself to cover, the game will just automatically stick you to cover if you walk into a wall or any other surface that you can take cover behind. But it's a little overly sensitive. It has a tendency to stick you up against any wall or piece of cover anytime that you get even close to them, regardless of whether or not you're actually trying to stick to it. This makes the cover system feel incredibly seamless while in combat because it's just instant when you want to get into cover, but very janky during exploration. It's an okay system, but it likely would have functioned a lot better if it had a dedicated button to stick you to nearby cover, similar to something like Gears of War. But I mean, what would you really be able to learn about cover-based shooting from the Gears of War franchise? It's only the series that's largely responsible for polishing up and popularizing this kind of gameplay just a handful of years before Operation Raccoon City came out, so it's probably not too important to look at for reference, right? Speaking of game feel stuff that's serviceable but not great, we unfortunately have to talk about the shooting. The shooting controls are exactly what you would expect from a game like this, but they're just really awkward in a way that's hard to describe. Though I do feel like you can kind of just see the awkwardness by watching the game in motion. I think a big component of this is that the weapon accuracy here is actually awful, with the game featuring a pretty extreme bloom mechanic. Which, if you're not big into first or third person shooters and you don't know the term bloom, it just means that your weapon accuracy gets worse for a short time after you fire your weapon. Hence, your aiming reticle blooming with each shot. The bloom here, though, is so bad that you basically have to be tap firing or at most burst firing your weapon at all times, as if you just hold down the trigger, you aren't going to hit a damn thing here unless you're touching them. So the aiming controls feel very loose and floaty, and the accuracy of the weapons is terrible, which is a really rough combo. It just makes the combat here feel very unsatisfying and frankly unpolished. And that's not even mentioning the melee combat here, which not only deals very little damage, but also feels really janky to use and just looks kind of bad too. There is, however, this one mechanic that's way cooler than it probably should be, where you can hold down the swap weapon button to whip out your pistol and snap aim at nearby enemies automatically. You can also slowly walk around while using it, which makes it look like you're slowly clearing out each and every room of zombies, which is probably the one part of the combat here that genuinely sells the impression of playing as a badass Special Forces member. I really don't have much more to say on the combat, so I'll just wrap up this little section by saying that while some of the combat is fun, it's generally just really poorly designed and doesn't play well, look cool, or feel fun to engage with. Which might be a bit of an overly negative way of putting it, but that's just genuinely how I feel. Now, something that I did think was pretty fun was the introduction of a virus mechanic into this game. When taking damage from certain enemy types, there's a chance that you might become infected, which will cause your health to slowly start draining. There are then antivirus sprays that can be found throughout the environments that can be used on yourself or your teammates to cure the virus, but if you don't have one or find one within the short amount of time you have, the virus will eventually just kill you. The part that makes this actually fun though is that if you die while you're infected, you'll quickly rise back up as a zombie and start attacking your squad mates, which is just a really fun addition. The only other time we've seen something like this was back in the Outbreak titles, and I loved it there, so naturally I also love the inclusion of it here. It just adds a fun layer of chaos on top of everything else going on in the game, and led to some hilarious moments during my playthrough where I would start randomly attacking my partner without warning her ahead of time, just to jump scare her with it. And if nothing else, I do have to note here that the level design and the encounter design in this game is actually really good considering what they were going for. It's not meant to play like a traditional single-player campaign. It's supposed to play more like a chaotic 4-player co-op shooter like Left 4 Dead. Throughout the game, you'll constantly run into these crazy encounters where your team will be put up against things like a large number of US military forces and a horde of enraged Crimson Heads at the same time. These get out of control super quickly, but you can approach these encounters in some fairly interesting ways, as the zombies and the BOWs obviously don't get along with the US military. So you can actually influence the zombies to go after the military by doing things like wounding an enemy soldier non-lethally, causing him to bleed everywhere and attract some extra attention from the hordes. It's genuinely really cool when it works as intended, and there are moments throughout the game where you can really see the vision and understand what they were actually going for. It's just unfortunate that these moments are so few and far between. Now, before wrapping things up here, I do have a couple of miscellaneous notes that I couldn't really find anywhere else in the video to mention smoothly, so let's just knock them out here. The first of these is that the dialogue and the character writing in this game is hilariously bad. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I don't think there is a single likable character in this game. Each of the Delta Force members are written to be super cool and edgy, but they have no other positive character traits outside of these, so they just come across as these unlikable assholes who think they're really cool when they're really not. At the very least, the dialogue does slightly change based on what combination of characters your squad is running, so that's pretty cool if nothing else. The next is that this game is really short. Like, it took us about 5 hours on our first playthrough kind of short. And due to the nature of this game's missions, that ending feels super abrupt since the majority of the missions in this game are unrelated to each other and have no consistent narrative through line. So we were kind of just playing through the game, and then suddenly we started to realize that we were close to the ending when they started talking about how they only have one more job to do before they get extracted from the city. And it genuinely took us both by surprise since we hadn't been playing the game for very long, and there was no real feeling of being near the end of the story prior to this. That being said though, the final mission itself was actually one of the coolest moments in the game, and I absolutely can't make this video without talking about it. This will mean effectively spoiling the ending of the game, which I'm sure most of you guys won't really care about since the game is both notoriously hated and non-canon, but if you don't want me spoiling the surprise, skip to the timestamp on screen. Okay, so during the final mission of the game, Delta Team ends up cornering Leon Kennedy, who we've been chasing through the city for the last couple of missions now. This is where the game presents you with an option. Either kill Leon to prevent his knowledge of Umbrella's involvement from leaking, or protect him and help him, Claire, and Sherry escape the city. And each player actually gets to make their own independent decision from the rest of the squad on this one, so the players who choose to defend Leon will actually be put up against the players who choose to kill him in one final battle. And this is honestly a really cool sudden twist, and during our playthrough, my partner and I both independently chose to kill Leon, as we were both just way too curious about how that would go. So for the final boss fight, we got put up against not only Leon, but also our two AI partners who we had just gone through the entire game with. And while it wasn't super impactful with it being AI partners, imagine if you had just played this game through with an actual squad of 4 players, and suddenly you guys get split against each other during the final boss. This was easily the single coolest moment of the entire game for both of us, and really did end a very meh experience with something genuinely awesome that stuck with us. Oh, and for those of you who are wondering how it does play out, not only did we end up killing Leon in the fight, but we also shot Claire in the head and kidnapped Sherry for Umbrella to experiment on. So, yeah, it's certainly an ending if you choose to go for it. Overall though, I thought Operation Raccoon City was just very It's not the worst thing I've ever played by any means, but it's not necessarily a game that I enjoyed either, and it's definitely one that you can tell needed either more time in the oven before it was released, or just a more experienced dev team behind it. And it's a real shame that this one isn't better than it is, because like I said earlier, the concept behind this game is just so damn cool. But unfortunately, this is probably the only time we'll ever see them try something like it, just due to how the game was received. It's a damn shame that the only game that we'll likely ever get where we play as Umbrella Special Forces during arguably the most iconic outbreak in the entire franchise will always be one that's stuck with an almost non-existent story, poor movement and shooting mechanics, a terrible art style, and repetitive design. It's a game that still has its moments of fun, but it's definitely not a game that I would necessarily recommend to other people unless they're just really big Resident Evil fans who also happen to enjoy playing jankier games. There is also a full DLC campaign for the game where you play as a whole new squad of US Special Forces who have been deployed to find the source of the outbreak, but nothing about this campaign really changes or adds to the gameplay at all, so it's more of just a story expansion than anything. As much as I hate to say it, even after giving ORC the fairest chance that I could, I'm still gonna have to say that it's just a very bland and uninteresting game for me. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City a 4.9. Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of another video. I'm sorry this one took a bit, but that last Yakuza video got pretty out of control pretty quick and took me nearly a month to make, so it was a bit delayed, but we're finally back on track with the Resi stuff. As always, if you enjoyed, feel free to leave a like, comment, subscription, anything to help out with the algorithm. It really does go a long way and make series like this one possible. And while you're at it, I'll have some links in the description below to go and check out my girlfriend's stuff and show her some thanks for helping out with the video. She does this whole YouTube and streaming thing too, so it would really mean a lot to me if you guys threw her a bone. And as always, a huge thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons who contribute to the channel. Doing this YouTube thing for a living can be really finicky because of inconsistent ad revenue and stuff, but you guys really do give me a solid safety net to fall back on, and I can't thank you enough. With all that being said though, I'm gonna let you guys go and get back to work on the next video, because if you know what's coming up next, you know that it's gonna be a pretty good one. So thank you guys again for watching, and I hope to see all of you right back here for the next Resident Evil review.